Welcome back, everybody. This is Michael O'Brien with the IFC Fire and Life Safety section, along with Chief Andy King, Richard Roberts, and Dan Finnegan with NEMA. And today we're talking about fire alarm control unit basics. This is the third part in our webinar series in which we are trying to break down what fire alarm systems are, how they work, so our responding companies have a better knowledge of what is taking place. So if this is your first one, don't forget to go back, check out system basics, because we're really going to start to talk about how the whole system works in webinar number 2. And going out in a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about initiating devices. So those are the things that make that fire alarm system beep. Chief King, you want to go over our learning objectives for today?
Yes, thank you, Chief. Today we're going to dive into the fire alarm control units, which used to be called fire alarm control panels. You'll hear that some people use those terms interchangeably, but talking about all the components there that make the system work and really how fire departments interface with the fire alarm system. We have the display. We also have remote enunciators on some systems. And then we have required switches and buttons, along with visual indicators. And then at the end of our learning objective for today, we'll have any questions or answers. With that, I'll turn it over to Dan Finnegan with the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. Dan?
Yes, thank you very much, Chief King, Chief O'Brien, and Mr. Richard Roberts. I'm looking forward here today to speaking to our dedicated first responders. And we're going to spend this next 20, 30 minutes or so, and we're going to focus on the actual fire alarm control panel, and more importantly, from the view of you, the first responder. When you're jumping out of that engine company or you're the incident commander rushing into a building in a lobby, and you're looking at that panel, and it's beeping, it's blinking, it's making noises. You know, the mission here today is to help show you exactly what these different lights and buttons mean and how you can utilize them in an efficient and professional manner. You know, but the most important part of this whole display is really, where is the alarm? Where is the fire at? That's the most important thing we need to tell you. Or as we're going to talk, where's the supervisory problem? Or maybe where's the trouble condition? But this is really about where is the problem you should be able to get from this panel. And then, you know, also, is that fire spreading? You'll be able to get that kind of information from looking at these panels and determining that. Also, it's going to drill down and give you the information, for the most part, of whether it's a smoke detector that's causing the alarm, or a water flow switch, which I know might change your technical approach to this, or if it's a tamper switch or something of a supervisory or trouble nature. So we'll try to spend our time, you know, inching our way through this as we go through the panels. And what I've got here on these slides is a depiction of various manufacturers of control panels, and I believe there'll be many of them that you probably generally see, you know, in your field today. So I'm going to touch on the common areas, and I'm going to always start from the top of the panel and work my way down. So you're going to see up here at the top, there's a general alarm LED. Then next to it is a supervisory LED, a system trouble LED, a system silence, and a system power. So that bottom light is the one I'm going to talk about first. The system power on light is the one that should always be on. If the panel is in normal condition and everything is working good, such as you're there doing a pre-fire visit, or you're there on an EMS call or something, and you look at the panel, the only light that normally should be on is the one for system power. That's letting things know that everything is fine and normal. When a detector goes off or a water flow switch is activated, you then will get a light for the general alarm condition. And then on this particular panel, on the right-hand side here in this red boxed area, will be an LCD display that will come up and give you a device address. It will give you the type of device it is, and it'll let you know where this is located at. So this is an addressable type of system here. So when you walk in, you're going to see device 01, smoke detector, Chief O'Brien's office, first floor. I mean, that's the kind of information that'll be on the display. You'll be able to look to see that it's an alarm condition, which means it's a fire of some sort has been detected. Now, when you walk in and you see the secondary light lit up, this one's called supervisory. As you hear on the next segment, when they talk about the different types of initiating devices, supervisory are those devices that are monitoring or supervising other systems, usually fire suppression systems. These are most commonly known as your tamper switches that are monitoring the open position of the water valves. These could be low air switches on dry pipe valves in other areas that are called supervisory. These are, when these go into supervisory condition, that's letting you know that there is a problem, but maybe not necessarily a fire. It meant somebody shut off your sprinkler system, or that the dry system is losing air, or that something is going out of its normal operating range. Another area that this could show up on is your duct smoke detectors. The code today, for the most part, is pointing towards duct smoke detection to come in as a supervisory signal into the fire alarm control panel and be transmitted to your central station and to your dispatch office as a supervisory signal, so that when you walk in, it'll show up here as duct detector HVAC unit 12, serving floors 1 through 2, and give a location of where that device is located. Now, so those first two are initiating alarms, letting you know where things have come from. The third light down, and so far these are going to be, by the way, lights you see on every panel, is the system trouble indicator. When that's on, that means that there's something within the overall system that's not normal. And it's generally being with the fact that these systems are all fully electrically supervised and all the stuff connected to them is supervised. For example, if you get a break in a wire on a floor somewhere, that panel is going to go into trouble to let you know that something is wrong. If you remove a smoke detector head from a base, the system is going to go into trouble. Once again, something has gone off normal condition. And there's lots of other reasons, but the trouble means service needs to be attended to promptly. I know that some departments, to maybe many departments, respond at some level to a trouble condition at the fire alarm system, because this can mean a lot of different things. It could mean that the primary power has also been lost and that you're on battery standby, which means you have your clock is ticking for how long that system will provide safety and life safety to that building occupants. So that's the trouble light that would light up. The next one down is the system silence light. That lets you know that the alarm has gone off and the actions have been taken to silence the system, which really brings us down to the next set of buttons that are on the left-hand side here. And I'm going to drop all the way to the lower left where you see the silence button. This particular system and particular panel, when you want to, you come in, you see what's happening here on the display, you're able to go to the silence button and hit the silence button and silence the notification in the building if you so request to do so. Then once the problem is resolved, you hit the reset button up here to reset the system. Now it's smart enough to know that when you hit the reset and for some reason a pull station has not been completely reset yet, or that there's smoke in a detection chamber, or there's a water flow switch that's still flowing water, after you hit that reset button, when the system recycles, it will go back into alarm again if the system sees one of those initiating devices still in alarm. So that is the important key buttons and lights that you're going to find on almost every panel that we're going to view here. So let's go down to the next slide, Chief.
Hey, Dan, this is Richard.
Yeah.
Before we go to the next slide, sorry about that, Chief. It looks like on the lower right-hand corner, it looks almost like a key switch there.
Yeah.
Are these display panels, are they behind a locked door? Can anyone get to that, or can only authorized people get to it?
No, thank you, Richard. That's an excellent point. I was going to cover it on a panel or two down, but our regulatory guidelines, which is under the realm of underwriters laboratories, does require a significant amount of these buttons and controls to be behind locked doors. As you see on this particular panel, everything is open to face view. There is no door to open here. The point that Richard is talking about is in order for you to be able to reset or silence this, you have to put in this key here and insert that key in order to turn this into a mode in which we'll be able to control. We'll show you on some of the other panels how some other panels work a little bit differently, but that's a very good point. Somewhere these points you're not going to be able to get to. Which brings us to the next control panel here. And now what we've done is we've opened up the door. So this is to Richard's point. Now you're inside the panel and you really weren't able to get, other than viewing from the outside, into what you're being able to look at here. And here you're going to see a lot of the same stuff that we talked about on the other panel. We're looking at AC power, the alarm condition, supervisory, silence and trouble. See how different manufacturers, different panels, but they still have the same lights. You can see here what that display starts to look like. This is in its normal condition. But what's important here is we do have some certain other buttons that pop up as a owner or manufacturer's option. These are not code required. But here's one that has a drill switch. This allows, when doing fire drills, that you're able to push and hold that button in for, in this case, 2 seconds. And what it'll do is it will activate the alarm notification devices and start the fire drill process in, for example, a school, without having to activate a detector or a water flow switch. So that's what that drill switch does there. You'll see that on many panels, but not on all panels. But you can see the other pieces here are similar to what we saw on the other panel. This one has a little bit more prominent acknowledge button, and then you have your reset. So generally on most systems, you need to go through a process. When you walk in, you need to acknowledge the system, then you can silence it if you wish, and then you can reset. One of the challenges I can remember when I was an early firefighter responding to these systems, I'd walk up to it and I would start pushing the reset button. Well, if you hit the reset button first, in most cases, that panel will not reset. You have to go to the acknowledge step, as this one is calling it, and then alarm silence if you so wish to, and then you reset. So it's kind of that 2 steps. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go through these different panel configurations. But keep this in mind, because right now we're in fire alarm control units, but we're also going to talk about remote enunciators in a little while, and you're going to see where there's a lot of similarities. Now what you're looking at with this display is a hardwired system. Those others were addressable. They had a little bit of computer power behind them. They were able to give you point identification. This is a traditional, in essence, this case, a 4-zone control panel. And this is what you're going to see from the outside. And you're going to see now just lights that light up here. You're going to see zone 1, and then you can see this one is red for fire alarm, supervisory, trouble, and maintenance. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But now you can see this particular system has 4 zones. That could be floors 1 through 4. It could be floors 1 and 2 with a water flow on each floor. It could be a couple of different configurations. That's why you usually need some form of a chart or a zone map next to this so that you know what those zones mean. But a zone here could have up to 30 devices on it in some cases. Generally, you try not to put more than 1 water flow switch on a zone, but if you're putting smoke detectors, pull stations, heat detectors, you can put multiple on a single zone, so you're not going to know where that fire is at specifically, but you'll know what area or what zone of the building the fire is coming from. And then you're going to see this maintenance light that I briefly mentioned. This is another manufacturer's option. It's not a code required, but it's a good feature in that that light will illuminate when there is a code required need for maintenance, or that there's something in its diagnostics that's saying, I need some help. But generally, this is a light that'll turn on. We know that fire alarm panels need to be inspected and tested at least once a year. So that light will light up annually for sure, and maybe more if it's necessary, to let people know that maintenance is required. But you see the trouble light here is going to give you your trouble conditions and the like. So this is a maintenance only. And you can see the indications down below here are pretty much the same that we saw, other than now you're going to see something called a NAC, which is your notification alarm circuit. That's where your horns, bells, and maybe speakers could be connected to. So once again, different panels go beyond the minimum to provide just a little bit more information. Let's go to the next display. So now you've gone back to the addressable, analog type systems. But once again, take a look at the similarities. We have a power on light up here at the upper left. This particular one gives you a light in case you have a system that's partially disabled. It's normally a trouble condition. It gives you also a disabled, partially disabled light. But when you go across here, it's the same stuff. Alarm acknowledge, the different acknowledgements and the different resets that are all accordingly set up here, along with the trouble lights, the supervisory lights. This particular panel also has a function of being able to monitor security devices. So door contacts, card access alarms, things of that nature is within the listings of this system to be able to bring those components into here. Those devices should never call the fire department, of course. Those are designated for owner's use or to go to the police department. But you can see that this is allowed to also bring in security on this panel. These other buttons down here is the panels get more complex. These are all generally for maintenance, for inspection and testing, and for programming purposes. But you'll see these F1 through F4s here. It sounds like computer keys. These are actually programmable function keys that are there for the ability to allow maintenance, or even during a fire inspection, you can push F1, for example, and you can turn off all the fans and disable the fans in the building. F2 could be, unlock all the locked doors in a building. Things that are controlled by event functions when the panel is going into alarm. These buttons can be used to program and simulate certain conditions accordingly. So once again, in this display up in the center here is like we saw in the other ones. This is where you're going to see the details of what device, where it's located, and what it's doing, whether it's an alarm, trouble, or supervisory. So I hope you're sort of getting the picture here of you're walking in and what to look at. If it's an alarm condition, you've got a fire. If it's a supervisory condition, you've probably got something that needs to be associated and be looked at because the system is potentially not going to function properly. And then if it's a trouble condition, well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's generally something that if you look at it and the panel's not smoking or the panel has primary power, that is going to need a repair organization to come out and diagnose what that problem is. But that's where that's at. Next panel, please. So now we're going into the remote enunciators. And what you're looking at here as you start to drill into these are in many cases a duplication of that face of that fire alarm control unit that we saw earlier. And these are the panels that are often displayed and placed right at the entrance door of the building that you walk into. So the one on the left here has all the same lights, buttons, and switches that you saw on the fire alarm panels. The one in the center here is more of that conventional zone approach once again. Zones 1 through 4, it happens to be saying where those zones are at right on here. Lobby, air handler 1 would be a duct detector, air handler 2, and then there's a basement. So this is obviously a lobby and a basement area, and this is letting you know as you walk in the door where the problem is originating from. You also have key switches here that are necessary to be able to silence it once again, and you're going to have to reset this one back at the control panel, which is most common the case. And then the last part of remote enunciation is this type called the graphics. I know you've all seen these. This is once again usually on a little bit larger building, a little bit more complex building, so that when you walk in, you will see a floor plan or a series of floor plans of your facility, and it'll actually have LEDs to show you exactly where the alarm is originating from. And these can be used from an incident command position, because as a fire starts to spread, those lights on that control panel on this graphic panel will also increase. And in practical theory and application, you can see the fire spreading down a hallway. You can see a fire starting to spread up to other floors and levels. So there's a reason to pay attention to these, to be able to understand what they're saying, but they shouldn't take more than a few moments of looking for you to be able to digest. They're intended to be kept pretty simple and basic. Now, of course, we have a series of buttons and other controls down at the bottom here. Once again, those are usually more for the service providers or the building engineers you work with. Your primary stuff is in the center here. Okay, next slide, please.
Dan, it's Andy. I was going to comment just on enunciators because in the fire service, we see these quite often, and they are required when the fire alarm panel is not accessible so that we enter. But it's important in the design phase to make sure we get that in the best location of where the fire department's going to enter the building. And then I also like to remind people that there can be more than one enunciator if we allow it. You could have it in the building engineer's office. You could have it in other places for people that want to know. The only caution of that is that all of those sites are potentially, they have the ability to silence and reset. That's the downside, in my opinion.
You're absolutely correct, Chief. And a lot of that is dependent upon yourself, the AHJ, the fire code official is really supposed to determine and approve the location of those enunciators. And, you know, the functionality can be varied, and you are allowing at the remote enunciator to be able to reset the system. So, yeah, it's incumbent upon the plan review process in working with the engineers and designers of the systems to make sure we all understand what's going to happen when these things are going in, because they can build in some complexities. This last slide is really just to remind ourselves of the required switches and buttons. And you can see here another form of display and different things going on. But if I can implant anything, just remember that you're always going to have a power on green light, that an alarm condition, supervisory, or a trouble condition will give you a light to let you know that that's what's going on in the control panel. And that when you go to reset the system, please remember to generally hit acknowledge first, then silence, and then reset. Go to the next slide, please. And we'll kind of review this one more time. So here's our required switches and buttons on that acknowledge. What does that mean? When you hit the acknowledge, what you're saying is that somebody's investigating the source of the alarm initiation. And then the silence will temporarily turn off the audible and visible notification appliances once you've gone through the acknowledge. So it's a process of just going through some steps. And when you're in silence mode and another detector or water flow switch should be activated, these systems by code are required to reactivate. So don't fear if you silence it that you're shutting off the whole building per se. Yes, you're silencing the building. That's why the word temporarily is there. But if that fire should start to grow or is detected at some other point, the system will completely realarm and reactivate. Next slide, please. The reset, I've touched on this at least 3 times now, and I just want to make sure that this is clear to all of us so that we're comfortable when it comes to resetting the systems. And that, you know, it does return the panel to normal. On the hardwired, simplistic type systems, it's literally pushing a button in, and within a matter of a second or two, you'll see this thing going to reset into normal. But on the more complex addressable analog systems where they're networked, et cetera, you know, the code allows up to X number of seconds, I think it's about 200 seconds, for these panels to go through an alarm restalling, reinitializing process. So, I mean, that could be a minute or two. So when you go through the reset process, don't be alarmed if you suddenly see the machine taking over and going through a matter of verifying all the devices and doing its thing. It's doing what it's supposed to do. But you'll know life is good when you just see a power on, green only light on after you've hit the reset. That tells you that that system is functioning normally. The trouble indication, as we mentioned before, is that an indication that something abnormal is in the condition of the system due to a fault. That supervisory, though, it's an abnormal condition of another system, of the supervision of another system. These two can sometimes get confused. I hope I'm explaining them well to you. Please come back to us if there isn't. But great examples of this as it's shown here. Tamper switches or duct detectors or low air switches. These are all switches that are doing their job the right way. When you close that sprinkler valve, shut that water off, that tamper switch, that switch is sending a supervisory signal to the fire alarm panel to say, I need some attention, and there's a serious issue here. Same with the duct detectors. We've detected the smoke. We've shut down the air handling unit, and now we need some attention. Although we don't necessarily need 2 engines, a truck, and a chief rolling in on these things. But I know most departments all respond on a supervisory to make sure that it's given attention and that the building owners and the maintenance staff get things corrected, and which allows you to be aware if that system is shut off, you're going to have knowledge of it. Next slide.
I think, Dan, too, if this, Mike, if I can just add on, right? If you're a responding engine company to maybe a water flow alarm, so you get there, there's horn strobes going off, people have evacuated the building, and if you go to the panel, right, as part of that first in assignment,
Yep.
if you scroll through or the indicator lights are on for supervisory, gate valve closed, or something along those
Yep.
lines, that's starting to piece together this investigative picture.
Yep.
Right? It could be somebody did it intentionally, right? Whether
Yep.
it was arson, or maybe it's somebody just doing a water flow test and oops, we forgot to put it in test mode or whatever it is. So
Yep.
I think you're onto something here. It's giving them a lot of information from a real fire to something that might be an oops.
That's correct. Yeah, and that's the whole key is to, be comfortable with these panels, be comfortable with the panels in your jurisdiction, and to ask questions of the folks that put them in, and they'll all be willing to give you guys training and to help you in every way. But we want these things to be your friends, and more importantly, to be a reliable asset of information. This last slide is just letting you know that there are relays and contacts in all the control panels. This is the stuff that controls doors and things that are really all happening automatically when a system goes in. Last slide. Last slide. Mr. Recap time. Go ahead, Chief.
All right, so hopefully we covered a lot on the fire alarm control unit basics for you today, and we spent a bunch of time because the display is really that key in telling you what the system's going through. We talked briefly about remote enunciators, so this is when we have maybe a sub panel or a smaller display somewhere beyond where the main traditional panel is. And we really try to review what all the switches, buttons are doing, as well as the visual indicators. Dan, one of the questions that somebody had asked for us online was really starting to deal with, on the panels, is it possible in a commercial setting that the fire alarm panel does burglar stuff as well?
Yes, that is an acceptable listing. Yes, it is, but it's not the burglar stuff like you would have in a home system. These are usually signals coming from a card access system to let them know that there is some form of a security attention that needs to be given to this thing. But yes, but there has to be a special listing. Not every panel can do that. Not every panel wants to do that. But where owners want to have that dual functionality, it's certainly available. Yes.
So somebody had also written in that their engine company responds to a very regular fire alarm, and the panel seems to be in look and feel like something somebody would have in their home. What is something an engine company could kind of encourage that? I mean, is it possible that somebody puts equipment that's made for a home in a commercial business, and could that be part of the reason maybe they're getting some frequent alarms?
Well, it certainly could be, because the standards that we briefly touched on before, the UL standards for home systems are different than they are for the commercial systems. And if you put in a residential operating system, which by the way are good, but they have different flexibility and different functionalities that are not really applicable for a commercial facility. Resetting remotely, all kinds of little technical things can be done in there. So I think it's a matter of the commercial system needs to be listed to UL 864. That's the number to remember. I don't want to give a lot of UL numbers and burden you with that. But if you remembered fire alarm needs to be 864, that's what you're good with that. Fire alarm 864.
That's the key, that commercial fire, not household fire,
yeah,
right?
That's correct. That's right. Yep.
Chief King or Richard, any questions for Dan to go over?
Yeah, Dan, I hate to ask, but related to that home system, what about passwords? Is there an easy rule of thumb there to understand when you can have a password on a system or not have one? especially as it relates to commercial building.
Yeah, that's a good point here. And generally speaking, the access that the fire department would need to get to the reset, acknowledge, that kind of key stuff is done by the door lock and the key in the door, like Richard helped us point out, or some kind of a functionality of a key inserted into a panel that allows you to do the important alarm silence and reset functions. Almost all of these panels that we looked at have a series of passwords because it's related to the software programming that's done. You know, I would hope that all the systems that are out there, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you need to go into the acknowledgement and silence and reset mode, that none of those are requiring passwords from a commercial fire alarm panel standpoint. Are you in agreement with that, Richard?
Yeah, I would agree.
Yep. So passwords, Chief King, it's usually only when you want to dig into software applications if you're dealing with the commercial. But if you're getting a password stuff on a panel, it could very well be a residential panel. The residential panels do have a frequency of needing a password to go in and actually turn it on or turn it off.
Great. Thank you for that information.
Sure.
Hey, we want to thank everybody for dialing in today, whether you watched on YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram. Hopefully, if you have questions, please leave them down in the post. We'd love to hear from you. Next week, we're going to start to dive into the things that make fire alarm systems go off. We call them initiating devices. Please join us again when we hear from our experts and hopefully help you respond better to fire alarm systems. Thanks, Dan, Andy, and Richard, and everybody. Have a great day.